Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Red Lines, a show where we dive into some daring subjects and cross some red lines of political speak or political conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about Russian propaganda, how it's created, and what we are going to expect to see in the next couple of weeks as the American election is coming up and the Georgian election is coming up, and what we have already seen from Russian propaganda and maybe not realized. I know we talk about Russian propaganda a lot, but we're going to try to take a bit of a different angle here and talk about the future, talk about the present, and talk about the past with some very, very um, pertinent examples. Today, here to talk about this, I have with me operator Starsky and Arthur Rehi.
Hello, my dear friends. Operator Starsky here. I'm joined with my good friends Arthur Ray from Estonia and Julia from Ukraine. She's currently in Ukraine. And today we will talk about Russian propaganda, something very, very interesting because Russians know a lot about propaganda and they do it every day. Let's talk about the Russian propaganda in the United States. Very, very active these days, specifically facing the upcoming elections. And why do they do that? Like the question is not even how they do it. The main question is why, and people must ask this question a lot. Why do Russians perform their informational warfare operations in the United States? Pushing support specifically for one specific American candidate. Why does it happen? Arthur, what do you think about it?
Hi everybody also. I'm Artur, I'm from Estonia. Hi Julia, hi Starsky. And you asked the question, good question. It's a topic it's hard for me to talk about in my channel because I am an Estonian, and every time I touch upon United States internal politics, I get killed by my viewers from US saying, "Oh, you cannot talk about it, you're not from the United States." But in my eyes, Russian propaganda works the same way in Estonia and in the United States, and they don't take an ideological stance. They take a stance of fueling conflict between anybody. As much as they can just fuel internal conflict between left and right, man and woman, feminist versus like other like internal conflict. That's their food. And this, like you asked me why. I think they want internal conflict in the United States before the election.
Yulia, in your opinion, like I'm stealing the seat of a host here, but in your opinion, can it be considered a combat operation? Like, yes, we're talking about information, we're talking about media, we're talking about partisan activities, like let's call it internet guerrilla warfare, because like AI deepfakes used and things like that. It's basically a covert operation mimicking legit American news outlets that literally copy pasted by ethnic Russian people in Russia, yes, to brainwash American people. But can we call this a hostile activity or a military activity, in your opinion?
Yeah, I would call it so because I think that in Russia particularly this is part of their warfare, right? Like they're not doing it just for nothing. They're doing it because they want to win the war. They're doing it because they want to shift the world order towards them, and that's part of their war. And in fact, I think that their covert operations and informational operations are a much stronger part of their military activity than their combat operations. Because clearly, if Russia could take something by force, they wouldn't have to create all of this propaganda and they wouldn't have to divide the West. They know that they're weaker than the West if the West were to come united and actually start giving a proper response. So instead of that, they are mobilizing what they know how to do best, and that's lying, scheming, and plotting, which is what we're seeing right now. It's funny, Arthur, that you say that people tell you cannot comment about US politics because you're not in the US. See, I always get that from Americans that find me for the first time because I'm very clear in being Ukrainian. However, I am an American taxpayer and I have lived there for 13 years, so I guess that's my carte blanche on being able to on being able to talk about American politics. I've been influenced by it a lot, and I've benefited and suffered from it for quite a bit. And what's happening in the US right now is like actually really scary for me because it does seem like Kamala was winning and winning very, very hard. And it was very evident that she was doing much better than Trump was. And obviously, that is not good for Russia because Kamala is pro Ukrainian, while Trump is pretty much ready to surrender Ukraine and stop weapons supplies and let Russia win. And I am seeing a lot more Russian operations in America, specifically right now, like 2, 3 weeks out of the election, than in the beginning because they see Trump as losing, so they have to help him. There have been ads on X, Elon Musk's X, which also Elon Musk is a great Russian agent, whether it's purposeful or just because it's convenient for him. But in Pennsylvania, for instance, they were sending campaign ads sponsored and approved by Musk, saying that Kamala is pro-Israeli, and in Michigan they were sending ads saying that she is anti-Israeli, based on what the population thinks of Israel. Then Tim Waltz recently had a huge conspiracy theory that was like going viral, specifically on X as well. And it was that he assaulted a student during the time that he was a coach. So, like 10, 20, 30 years ago, maybe. And this student came online and recorded a video talking about how she was assaulted by him. Turns out that the student was an AI deepfake, and the whole story originated from a Russian hacker group 1516, and they created the articles, they embedded the articles into the internet and created the fake video. So that's very interesting, especially considering that a lot of the people that do vote for Trump tell me that I'm crazy and a conspiracy theorist, and that Russia doesn't have anything to do with Trump, and that Putin doesn't control him. And it's like, yeah, so why are they helping him so much?
Yeah, and it's a good question. And if we take other, I would say, covered operations like the one with Tenet Media, it was like extremely huge scandal last month. But at the same time, Tenet Media is just a drop of water in this huge sea of Russian nefarious activities in the informational environment, because according to the data that was declassified, that was presented by the FBI, there's approximately 3,000 different influencers out there working directly with the Russia Today, like directly with the ethnic Russian staff sitting there in Moscow and providing them with different narratives that correlate with Russian agenda. And it was the data as of last year, I believe, like as of 2023, because in 2024 they have apparently much more of them. And 1/4 of those people, they're physically located in the United States. So this is the reason why, like the main reason why they do that, why the main activities are directed against the United States, is obviously because Russia always considered the United States their main adversary. Or is it because of the elections? How do you think, Arthur?
I mean, it's again very controversial to open up this topic, but looking at what Joe Biden promised to do, and his office promised to do for Ukraine at the beginning of the term, or when the full-scale invasion began, and looking at how it has gone, then Jake Sullivan, for example, is part of Joe Biden's team, and looking at the de-escalation plan and strategy. In my personal viewpoint from Estonia, if you try to de-escalate and talk with Russia right now at this point of the conflict, you are just showing them the signs of, we are weak, do what you want. So I don't know which President Putin wants in the office there, but I'm sure Joe Biden, he has been pleased with Joe Biden's actions, because United States could have sent a lot more. Like, they could end the war tomorrow if they would want to, but there's the escalation plan, which is Joe Biden's approved. Now, of course, Donald Trump also would be very useful for Putin. So seeing it from Estonia, any president who is afraid of Russia and their nuclear weapons, and Jake Sullivan, for example, all kind of that de-escalation strategy is useful for Russia. And whoever will be the president, if they continue this de-escalation strategy, in my eyes, is a loss for Ukraine and victory for Russia.
It
Well,
raises a
interestingly,
very
you
good
know,
question. How?
yeah. No, I was. Hello, host Starsky. I'm kidding, but no, I was gonna
Sorry,
say that
sorry.
it's actually that. No, it's cool. I like it. But I was gonna say that it's actually a very good opinion. Well, Biden is a very old school politician, and Biden is of he's been in politics for 50 plus years, I believe. He took office before my parents were born, so it's been a while. So Biden, I think his policy is it's not just Ukraine. I think in general he is very scared of taking risks. Not only was he always a very, I call that a flatline politician, which is like a very typical, a very like not standard, but a very by the book politician. Like he kind of like is in the middle. He doesn't do anything too much to the right or too much to the left. He doesn't sway too much from the middle ground. And I think he's taking the same approach in Ukraine, and he's of the school of thought of like great big Russia and the Soviet Union, because that's when his career was forming, right? When great big scary Russia was the Soviet Union. So I think that the Democratic Party themselves, and maybe Kamala, which I can't speak because no one really knows what she's like, what she's going to be like as a president, but I think the Democratic Party itself and the Republican Party, not including MAGA people, understands that a lot more severe action is needed in order for this war to tip into Ukraine's favor and actually for the world to gain something from it, not lose to Russia. But while Biden is president, it's just not going to happen because he is a very, like, he's a risk mitigator. He's not a risk taker. And that's an issue in this particular scenario because this is not your typical time of politics. This is brink of World War III, or not even, it's brink of World War III for the rest of the world. I think, to be fair, we all understand here in Europe that we've been in World War III for a while now.
Yulia, I have a question for you then. One of the main goals for the Russian propaganda, if we analyze all the data collected from the Russian agency that was conducting the informational operations on the West, not only in the United States but also in countries like France, Germany, etc. One of their goals was to increase the nuclear hysteria among civilians, which is very interesting because there is a reason why Russians needed everybody to talk about Russian nuclear weapons. Apparently because people didn't consider it a serious threat, maybe because Western citizens were not really scared of that. And Russians decided that we need to make them fear. We need to make people around the world talk more about the Russian nuclear weapons, like Medvedev's threats, they were also kind of funny because he was mentioning nukes in his every speech. But at the same time, they wanted people to fear. So the West would not participate in helping Ukraine as much, right? Yulia, how do you think did Russians succeed in increasing this nuclear hysteria in the United States?
Part yes and part no. So there are a lot of people in the United States, like younger generation, right, that are not really scared of the nuclear weapons because they're not necessarily aware of what that is outside of just like, ooh, the scary word. But people who are older, I think, like, the idea that Russia is trying to do here is that most voter in most countries are usually older, except for Ukraine, because we all vote. It's our duty, and we take it. But in a lot of European countries and in the West in general, including the United States, most people who do vote are older people. And older people are the people who are aware of the nuclear weapons and how scary they are and what they can do, is because they lived through the Cold War. But what Russians didn't take into account is that now the voters are Gen Z. Like, a large part of voters are Gen Z. It's something like, from 2020 election till today, 25 million baby boomers and older voters have died, and 45 million people who are 18 or 19 or something, who weren't eligible to vote in 2020, are going to be eligible to vote in 2024. They have no clue what a nuclear war is like. They have no clue what that means. They didn't live through nuclear threats from the Soviet Union and the Cold War. So for them, it's just it's a word. It's just kind of one of those signaling words. So partially yes and partially no. I think the older generation is more scared. The younger generation is just kind of Nukes? Yeah, nukes are bad. That's about how I can describe the awareness of what that is.
Is there anything like, we should stop helping Ukraine, otherwise Russia will nuke us?
Among older people, even if you look on Twitter and you look at like the accounts that are perpetuating the whole nuclear narrative, if you go into their profile, it's like mom of two, or like blessed to have two lovely babies, or like, I love my five dogs. But it's never younger people. Younger people kind of like don't perpetuate that. So yeah, I think older people are a lot more inclined to fall for nuclear hysteria and to say not to like specifically for that reason, not to support Ukraine, than younger voters are. But then also, most of the people who do understand why we should support Ukraine are older people, and younger people just simply don't care.
Yeah.
That's a
And I
generalization.
wanted to,
Obviously, there are older people that don't care and younger people that do care, but generalizing, yeah.
because younger people always make better soldiers. I'm very cynical here as a former military. But at the same time, Arthur, what do you think? What's scarier for Estonian people? What's scarier, Russian nukes, Russian tanks, or people with Russian flags on the streets?
Right now in Estonia, like at this moment, I mean, scary. It's a philosophy, but I have to start with this, otherwise we cannot even talk about the issue. That fear is a choice, danger is real. You know the how the topic goes, and a lot of people choose to be afraid. So they choose to be afraid of Russian nukes or Russian tanks, but in reality, the threat to Estonia right now, the most would be Russian tanks, because the fifth column, you say Russian people with flags in Estonian streets, that fifth column or FSP column in Estonia has kind of been annihilated. People, activists have been sent out of the country. Police is talking to people immediately if anything happens. They just go and knock on the door and politely say that we know what you are, we know what you're doing, we're watching you. You can do what you want, but at some point, then we're going to send you out of the country. And usually, that conversation already stops most of the people from doing anything. No violence, no gunshots, nothing. Just immediate talk that they know that they're being watched by the government. And the Estonian government has a jurisdictional uh, right to send them out of the country because they're dangerous to the country. So the fifth column is not a threat right now. Russian nukes are not a threat because there is no point reality. There is no point in nuking Estonia in any way, because St. Petersburg is right next to us. I mean, it's just even a stupid topic to go into. Will Russia nuke Estonia? The answer is no, and it will always be no. Russian tanks would be, in reality, on the ground, the biggest threat because Russian artillery and Russian conventional army, because the war crimes Russian soldiers do, the tanks, they destroy buildings, artillery destroys entire cities. That is the realest threat. But if we look at in reality, again, how many Russian troops are in Ukraine? Where are Russian units that were supposed to be on the Estonian border before the full scale invasion? Pihkva, Pskov is the Russian city right next to the Estonian border. There was VDV units, paratroopers units, like semi-special forces. All of them, 90% of them are dead in Ukraine, like confirmed dead. They don't exist. So Estonian border is empty. There's no Russian units here that could do anything to us. So if you ask about the threat this year, next year, there is no threat at all.
Yeah, I think I remember those Pskov paratroopers back in the days. One of them is hanging in my garage. I mean, like that Yemelian, the hat. Yulia, the main reason I value you so much, besides being my friend, is because, now I have what to answer to all our American viewers who tell me, don't talk about American politics, you don't understand anything, because I can always refer to you. And by the way, I'm seriously running out of interesting question. I hope you will help me here.
I mean, yeah, of course. Technically, thank you for doing my job for the past 20 minutes. I do very much appreciate it, but genuinely, those were very good questions. I mean, hey, as to the topic of like deferring to me, please do so. It's my favorite thing to do because people come in and say, "I'm an American taxpayer. You have no like right to speak about it." I'm like, well, baby, I'm an American taxpayer too. What will you say now? But yeah, I mean, like it's interesting that like there is no threat towards there is not an actual threat of Russia at the Estonian border right now or in Estonia, right? But there are like my question, I guess, towards propaganda is like, are people still sort of like seeing? So let me paraphrase this. So in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and I'm not like I'm not trying to mix them all together, but it's because they're close by and they're obviously neighbors, right? There are lots of Russians immigrating out of Russia and kind of like coming into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, creating those like little Russian areas of living, I suppose, and dissimulating themselves all over the countries and taking over with Russian language. They refuse to study Estonian, they refuse to study Lithuanian, they refuse to study Latvian, and then they come in and say that like, oh, we're being deported for not knowing the language, we've lived here for like 55 years or like 60 years or something like that. Is there a threat of like these Russian citizens perpetuating do they change the narrative in Estonia at all? Like, do they play into the propaganda and do they change minds of Estonians that are not Russian?
We had bronze night, that's what we call it, a night in forgive me about the year now, 2007 I think it was, right, when all of these Russians, and back then we had a massive fifth column under FSB in Estonia, they were activated. It was a riot. They destroyed in the capital buildings, they looted, it was a full riot. Estonian army was in high alert, and that happened. And after that, Estonian police and internal police have changed their tactics, not towards violence, but towards openness. So many Russian activists were sent out, deported, and the rest who were not deported, immediately there was a communication with the police that we're not going to beat you up, we're not going to jail you, we're just here to tell you that we know what you are, we know what you're doing, and you can do it, but then we're going to deport you. If you don't do it, you can live here. And some of the people have been deported, some of them stopped what they were doing, and now it's 15 years later, and majority of the young Russians who are living in Estonia have taken a stance of not being pro-Russia, but definitely not being pro-Ukraine, more like being, I don't care about this war, I'm a pacifist. That's how most Russians act when they want to run away from this war mentally. And I mean, it is not a mindset I would support, but it's a better mindset than being pro-Ukraine, because that leads to a riot. I'm sorry, pro-Russia, because that leads to a riot. So in Estonia right now, yes, I would say Russian propaganda is trying to get in, trying to work very hard, but I'm very proud about the work of our police. Without violence, without stuff we see in Western Europe of explosions in the factories and beatings up on the street, we don't have that stuff. We have police knocking on the door and just politely saying that we're watching you and we have a right to deport you tomorrow. And that usually stops everybody.
I mean, hey, that's a really good policy. It's kind of like blackmail without blackmail. It's like, hey, you can either act like a upstanding citizen or you're going to go back to Russia tomorrow. You pick. But do you think the information space has changed since 2022? Because obviously, before 2022, with a large amount of Russians living in Estonia, do you see like the difference in how the information is being spread, or like the availability of Russian information, or sort of like how do they, because I'm assuming all of the channels from Russian propaganda and just generally Russian speaking channels probably have been banned, right?
In Tallinn, the capital, it's a stupid fact, but it's a reality that 1991 to 2023, actually 24, it happened this year, it was a Russian power in the capital. It is very strange. Liberated Estonia, free Estonia, but the capital was run by a pro-Russian party. Money came from Russia. It was so strange. That changed in 2024, this year at the beginning, and now Russian media was shut down. In the movie theaters, when you get like, don't record the movie, this will be said only in Estonian. I mean, these small things in the buses and everything, they don't speak Russian anymore. In the gym, you hear like, don't drop your weights. That sentence always comes, not in Russian anymore. So these small things have changed in the public space. They say it in Estonian and English, but not in Russian anymore. And that is a change that didn't happen before the full-scale invasion, because the country did not want to agitate the Russian population of a few 100,000 in Estonia. But now these things are being done just like that, because it's Estonia, and this war has set things into very black and white space. Another thing is destroying the pro Soviet monuments. All of them have been destroyed in Estonia in the last 2 years. the governments have been slow and bureaucracy to like destroy them. So people have been just hammering them down at night secretly, and the police is like, okay, what can we do? It's vandalism, but we cannot really find the guy. So yeah.
Do you think are Estonians happy about these changes? Do you think that that's something that you appreciate? Because, for instance, like we've experienced something like that in Ukraine, obviously starting in 2014, but not nearly on such a huge scale until 2022. And while, like you said, these small changes, I think these small changes are the most important ones because, like, I'm noticing it used to be you would be on the train and you look at the glass and it says like, oh, don't break glass or something like that, or don't touch glass or don't lean on glass, and it would always be in Russian. And now the train itself has the inscription in Russian, but but they were trying to kind of like scratch it off, and now there is a sticker over it in Ukrainian that says don't scratch glass or like don't touch glass in Ukrainian. And these changes seem so small, but they're very impactful because the new generation is not going to grow up knowing Russian, and the new generation is not going to grow up knowing what it is, so they're not going to be able to participate in Russian info space.
I mean,
Do you think Estonians
connected to
appreciate
this
these?
topic again, yeah, I do. I mean, Estonians are very slow-hating people. They're, in a way, like it's a very bad comparison, but like Putin, like cold, the emotion stays inside for a long time, and once it's the right time, it comes out. Estonians are like that. So for 30 years, 1991 to now, people have been secretly wanting to do these changes and being angry of the government who doesn't do that. And now these changes have been done. But I still remember when Starsky and I went to Bucha for the first time. He made us a tour, and a very informative tour, which was really shocking to me. And then we went to McDonald's and ate in Bucha. And Starsky told me how this McDonald's was opened like almost as fast as possible, and people really accepted it because it was really dark times, and then they could eat a cheeseburger. It's not only McDonald's in my eyes. I also love McDonald's in Estonia. I mean, it's not just food. It's part of Western culture, part of capitalism, part of this tasty burger that symbolizes everything that the free West has, the free market. And for me, it means the same thing. So these small things like opening a McDonald's in Bucha, I think they're very important, and they're also happening in Estonia right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to talk about one thing that is very, very important to talk about, to explain our viewers why we are doing what we're doing with the Russian language in Europe and in Estonia and in Ukraine as well. Because generally it's like repressions of Russian language. Russians were just protecting Russian language in Ukraine, from being oppressed. First of all, Ukraine. Okay, it was occupied by Russian Bolsheviks, Russian communists for 70 years, and you had to learn Russian language, as well as Buryats, Yakuts, all kinds of national minorities in Russia, Dagestani, etc., etc. They had to learn Russian language because otherwise you would be considered Untermenschen. Nobody would take you seriously if you don't speak Russian, because you could be only successful if you speak Russian language and basically assimilate with Russian people, consider yourself a Russian, So Russian language was forcefully brought to Ukraine, to Estonia and other countries. That is one thing. Another thing is that Russian language, specifically in Ukraine, was used as a foundation for the Russian invasion. For all kinds of Russian interventions in Ukrainians' internal, political life, Russian language was always used as a weapon, always used as a basis that brought Russian tanks to Donbass and Crimea, and later to like Kiev Oblast, etc., etc. They created, because Russians like to create this distorted reality, they created this very, very interesting opinion that if you have one language in Ukraine, the country will be divided. But if you have two languages, the country will be united. How freaking like insane is this? Like your country will be united if you have two languages, but separated if you have only one, your like national language. So this is why we're doing what we're doing. Russians will, and they show that they use it successfully, and they will use Russian language as one of the reasons to invade other countries. This is written in their like external, like in their geopolitical doctrine, in their military doctrine. They consider themselves like saviors of the Russian nation, God's chosen Russian race, wherever they are in the world. So basically, if there's quite a few like Russian speaking people in Alaska, and they call Kremlin to help them because they have to learn like English language for some reason, living there for like 30 years, and they don't want to, those Americans oppress them, then Kremlin will be, conducting this pressure at American people, saying, guys, you have to make Russian language like your second or first state language, whatever. This is why Russian language, even though it's just a language, I speak Russian. I'm sure Yulia also speak Russian. Like we know how to speak Russian. And a lot of Ukrainians do. If you watch 50% of Ukrainian soldiers fighting against Russian invaders, they speak Russian. It's just a language. But at the same time, this language, as everything used by Russians, can be used as weapons to kill people. This is something very, very important to remember.
Yeah, I mean, Russia uses ideology of hate, and Russia uses the ideology of like, oh, you're Russian because you speak Russian language. I'll give you an example actually that has to do with Estonia, and I'm sorry, it's going to be super racist, but that's sort of like Russia used to, in the Soviet Union, impose stereotypes about people. Right? It would be like Ukrainians are poor, like, I don't know, Caucasian people are dirty, like people from Caucasus, right? Poor and dirty. And then there was this thing about Estonians being slow. And people would, like Russians would make fun of Estonians for how they speak and like, make those jokes, and like it would be part of like comedy clubs and stuff. So before I went to the US, I had my friend's car that has Estonian license plates. Because the car came from Estonia and it's supposed to go to the front line, but before it was brought to like a mechanic in Lviv, I was driving it for a month, right? Again, the car has Estonian license plates. I was giving a lift to someone that I know who's like an acquaintance, and they're older, like they're in their 50s. And I was having a really bad day, so I was driving really badly. Like it was a terrible driving day. And and I knew that all of these like things were my fault. It's just like I was not focused. It was like not good. I missed a couple of red lights. And I was like driving, and I made a comment about how I missed a couple of these red lights. And this person who was in their 50s, so obviously they lived through the Soviet Union and through the Soviet propaganda and in that environment, right? They go, oh, but it's okay though. You have an Estonian license plate. They'll just know you're slow. And I was like, I mean, no. First of all, it's not okay. Second of all, what? But that's the thing, it's like this comes from the Soviet Union, where like the ideology is to divide and divide and instill hate and instill these inferior stereotypes. It's like Russians are good, Russians are smart, Russians are brilliant, Estonians are slow, Ukrainians are poor, other people are like not hardworking enough. And that's what they do, and that's kind of what they're trying to do in America. It's hate, right? They're trying to hate minorities, they're trying to hate LGBTQIA people. It's like the campaigns of politicians that are close to Russia or that follow Russia or like Russian propaganda are never about development in some sort of way. It's never a campaign about bettering this or bettering that or making these rights more approachable. It's always a campaign of hating something and taking something away, and that's how something is connected to Russia and Russian propaganda, because it's always the ideology of hate and always the ideology of taking something away from someone. Also, sorry for I'm like I feel bad even saying the whole thing about stereotypes, but
Yulia, I tell you this, the reason why I like Ukrainian jokes is because, for example, in Russia, yeah, there's plenty of jokes, plenty of those anecdotes about like Estonians being slow, Americans being stupid, Ukrainians being like greedy and poor, and etc. etc. But in Ukrainian jokes about Russians, they're usually dead. So this is a positive thing about it. I'm done.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, but at least those are like real, right? Because they're invading us and we're like trying to like unfortunately make that happen, right? But it's sort of you I just didn't really know how to I never know how to react to those like Soviet people that grew up in the Soviet Union and are like, they're Ukrainian, they're anti-Russia, but they still actively participate in everything that the Soviet Union like taught them. And so when I tell you, I don't know what to say to this man who tells me, "Oh, it's okay," like they're just gonna, you have Estonian license plates, so they're just gonna know not to worry because you're slow, right? And it's like, what do you say to that? Because I don't want to laugh at it and like kind of be like, haha, yeah, right. But I also don't want to like, I don't want to let it go. Like I kind of want to, I want to let them know that they're basically perpetuating Soviet culture, right? But I never know how to like talk to these people because I feel like they're far gone. I don't think there is anything you can do with it. It's kind of like,
When I look, okay, this is a myth, like big myth that was created by Soviets, of course. But now, when Russians invaded Ukraine, and we all saw those myths being ruined, this indestructible Russian army, officers' honor, right? Russian officers' honor that doesn't freaking exist, and things like that. When we saw those myths being ruined, I think that soon we will see other myths being like completely forgotten. For example, one interesting case that I can bring here is that in Hostomel, a grandma told me a story when she saw like a Russian looter, because Russians loot. This is their way of fighting. They always loot like toilets, etc. Local grandma in Hostomel saw a Russian soldier, right, a Russian invader, with a tap that he took from a sink somewhere in a civilian, apartment. And she asked him, "Why the hell did you need that tap?" Like literally. And he said, "It's because I want to have hot water in my apartment," in his Ust, Mukhasransk. And she's like, "Do you know how it works?" He's like, "Yeah, I will just, you see, this tap has like hot and cold water, and back in my Russia, I only have like the one with the cold water, so I will just plug it in the wall and I will have hot water for my whole family." And grandma didn't even know what to tell him, because apparently this is something that he would not comprehend. That's why all the jokes that Russians created about like all other nations being slow, stupid, and poor, that is basically about themselves, because Russians are known for projecting everything on other people, like literally everything, all the atrocities they commit, all the, I don't know, like downsides, and etc., etc., what they have themselves, they like to project on other people. That is why there is another positive news, is that such things, as you heard in the car, they will become a matter of the past very, very soon. New generations will raise, they will be absolutely different. Of course, it only depends on us what will be in their heads, in their minds, in their perception of our world. But generally, all that created in the Soviet Union will peacefully die together with the Soviet Union. That's just my opinion.
hopefully, well, it'll hopefully die together with the Soviet Union as long as we ban Russian publications and Russian language and their culture. I don't know if I was talking about this to you, but I don't think people in the West realize how many like newspapers Russian oligarchs control, and how much media Russian oligarchs control, and why it's so easy for them to like meddle in the elections and in people's perceptions and stuff. So, do you remember Vice News? Vice News went bankrupt. It went bankrupt a couple of years ago. I had friends who worked there because it was in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and the offices closed, and their print like died way before that. Their digital died, right? Vice News was one of the largest perpetuators of the idea of the civil war in Ukraine and Nazis in Azov. In fact, they had a lot of YouTube videos where they were like, "Today, we are in eastern Ukraine embedded with the neo-Nazi unit of Azov, and here's how it works," right? They had all of these sort of like things, and then they went bankrupt. And they had no funding. So a week and a half ago, I get an ad for Vice News. We are coming back. Big and back, baby, right? Had no funding, suddenly have funding. They're coming back with both print and digital. And if you know anything about print media, it is expensive. And it doesn't like creating print media right now, unless you're a large conglomerate that's existed like for years, like New York Times or something, it's actually eating away at your money. But the New York Times can afford for it to eat away at their money. Smaller newspapers or smaller media agencies like Vice cannot. And they're coming back with a quarterly print magazine that's going to be featuring art, which again is super non profitable and actually a money drain. Their first magazine launches with a Russian photographer who lives and works in St. Petersburg. Put together the math of where the money to relaunch Vice News came from. And the reason why things like Vice News are super dangerous and Russians buying them and investing in them are super dangerous is because they're bipartisan. They're independent media. So they're not connected to the right or to the left. And the people who were watching them were the young generation because it was a cool, hip news, news outlet. I remember, in fact, me and my friends read a lot of Vice News in college because it was considered to be like a hip media, and people who worked there were my age at that time. They were like 22, 23, not in their 40s, right? So it was something you could relate to. So that was brainwashing of the younger generation. And the people who were watching these videos about Azov being Nazis and, Ukraine being in a civil war were people my age that went to college with me. And they're trying to do that again. Interesting. How do you go completely bankrupt and then re-emerge 2 or 3 years later with all this money to fully start anew, and your first publication is of a Russian artist who works and lives in St. Petersburg? I can't
That
even
is
begin
that is
to.
that is so crazy. Speaking of Nazi Azov, I was watching Vice videos, right, on a YouTube, and I expected this moment when instead of showing or like searching for Nazi in Ukraine, Vice would sometime, I don't know, decide to make a video dedicated to like one of the 52 freaking biggest neo-Nazi organizations in the US. Because in the US currently there's approximately 52 biggest and more than 100 smaller neo-Nazi groups active. We're talking about like Blood and Honor, which by the way very 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 popular in
Proud
Russia.
Boys.
Like it's one of the I'm not sure. Arthur, did you hear about like Blood and Honor in Estonia?
I don't think we have it in Estonia because I'm not aware of it.
I don't know, but generally they're very widespread. It's like, those Nazi skinheads, they're very widespread, like everywhere. In the United States, they are considered one of the biggest ones. Then there's like Aryan Brotherhood, and like there's a lot of them. You can find them
Proud
all on the
Boys.
Wikipedia.
Proud
So
Boys and
for
stuff
some
like that.
reasons, for some reason, Vice would not go and try to infiltrate, some of their own violent groups. They would spend tremendous resources trying to find like neo-Nazi in Ukraine. Guys, there's like a whole
Can
front
I
of work
actually?
for you in your homeland.
Yeah, can I also like add to this? So, to what you said that they weren't trying to find them in America, right? Also, Arthur's facial expression when you said, "Do you know if there are these neo-Nazi organizations in Estonia?" was priceless because he was like, "I don't know. I've never really like, I've never really tried to find them." But you're actually super right. It's a great example to show how Russian propaganda is being created, right? Because so I watched a video. It was Vice News maybe or something else, right? And it was coming to an Azov recruiting event. So back in the day, in 2016 or something, Azov used to have recruiting events, but that doesn't mean that they find people and all the people that come there are going to be recruited into the unit. Because you actually have to, like, what people didn't realize, it's not like you come and you're like, hi, I want to serve here. Like, you have to pass an exuberant amount of tests, physical tests, and they're really difficult because their training is very similar to that of Navy SEALs. It's an elite assault unit. Like, it's hard to get in there. Like, sure, you can be invited to the trials, but they're huge. And for them to like find more men that could be physically fit to serve, they would throw these like Cossack siege looking like events, right? It would be with this like wooden fortress type of thing. There would be like fire everywhere, and it would be like a night of sort of like, just having fun and socializing, and then sort of signing up to come to like a trials round and a boot camp, and then in the boot camp they would like they would weed people out. But so when you come to that like invitation event or to that like sort of party event, right? Here's what it looks like on camera. It's a big wooden fortress with lots of fires, and there are guys saying Slava Nazi, which means glory to the nation, and it looks about like this, right? So this news outlet, whether it be Vice News or whatever it was, came, filmed all of these like big white dudes with lots of tattoos, most of them with military haircuts, right? So like bald, or like tiny short little hair, all of this fire everywhere, and they were like, "This is the infamous neo-Nazi unit Azov." So obviously, there is no indication that any of this is neo-Nazi. They did film them saying Slava Nazi, which sounds like Slava Nazis. So that was great for them. And then the second thing that they did to create this image that like yes, it is a neo-Nazi unit is there was, in fact, a neo Nazi from Norway who came to these trials to try out to get into the unit because he has heard that this is a neo Nazi white supremacy unit. And he has all of these swastikas everywhere. And mind you, this is an event with like thousands of people. It's not like Azov recruitment sees every single dude that has a swastika tattoo and goes goodbye, right? They don't even know he exists there. So he was like, yeah, I want to try out and I want to get into this unit. And they took his phone number, and then they followed up with him 2 weeks later, which if he actually got into the unit, he wouldn't have his phone because I know for a fact that the boot camp is 3 weeks and you don't, you're like, you're dying. Like you're physically exhausted and like you're working out every day. You're not talking to news outlets on the phone. You don't have your phone. You're in a boot camp. But so they followed up with him and he was like, oh yeah, I was accepted. I'm now part of the Azov regiment. And that was their confirmation that they hire specifically neo Nazis because there was this Norwegian neo Nazi dude who came to try out for Azov and he told them he got in. But when you package all of this together, right, to you it looks like evidence. They came to this event, it looks scary, fire, guys saying Slava Nazi, and there is a neo Nazi trying out and getting in. Boom, a neo-Nazi unit in Ukraine. And that's how propaganda is created because in reality, they didn't do any investigation. There was no evidence there was anything neo-Nazi going on there other than literally a dude and his own beliefs coming there because he's watched videos like this. But for people that's enough, and that's how Russian propaganda is created. You just take things out of context and you frame them the way that you want.
Oh my god. I literally I want to interview all of my Jewish friends who support Azov. Like specifically to debunk this stuff because
I have Jewish
something
friends in Azov. Like I have friends who are
I
Jewish
have Jewish
in Azov.
friends who support Azov because I know that Muslim community in Ukraine, oh my god, Islamic center in Ukraine, as well as plenty of Jewish communities. support Azov for a very, very simple reason. First of all, because they protect them against Russians. And another interesting question that people should like ask themselves is why Azov Nazi? Like why? Because generally it's either you openly admit that you are Nazi, for example, like Russian Deshergia Rusich, like Alexei Melchikov, like Alexander Dugin back in his days, like Dmitry Rogozin and everybody else in Russia. You either openly admit that you're Nazi or you're doing something that Nazi do, which is basically attacking like national minorities, like people having other religion and stuff. But at the same time, in Ukraine, we can see absolutely different picture. Azov never openly admitted that they were Nazi. They were always saying that they consider themselves patriots, nationalists, but never Nazi. And there's also plenty of national minorities freaking supporting Azov with money, donating blood to the soldiers. Why does it happen? Well, it's literally because in the eyes of the Russian propagandists, everybody is Nazi. You, Arthur, according to the Russian propaganda, is Nazi because you live in a Nazi NATO country. Yulia, of course, Americans are Nazi and gay at the same time. How exactly?
I would like to point out that I'm not just a Nazi according to Russian propaganda. I'm also a CIA employed Nazi because, of course, having been born and raised in Ukraine, I can't sound the way that I sound. So I have to work for the CIA, pretend to be Ukrainian, and also be a Nazi because obviously, what else could you be if you're pretending to be Ukrainian?
Oh my God, I envy you so much because, like, I work for George Soros, and George Soros hasn't paid my bills for like already 2 years.
Me too.
Still
And like,
waiting.
me too. And the problem is that he has all the money to pay the bills. I would love to work for George Soros. What do you mean? The man could pay me such a good salary.
Oh my God, Arthur obviously works like for Andriy Biletsky directly. Like, I'm 100% sure.
Wait, you guys are
Oh my
getting
God.
paid?
Oh well.
Damn it.
We're supposed to. I
I
think our
wish.
checks just got lost in the mail. Yours too. I'm sure it's gonna get there at some point. George Soros, he doesn't even like actually directly employ you. He just sees you talking about Ukraine and spreading Ukrainian propaganda, NATO propaganda, Nazi propaganda, and CIA propaganda, and you immediately get on the payroll. That's just how it works.
Dear,
I'm
jo-
gonna,
Dear
yeah.
George, if you're watching this, please pay because otherwise I will get employed by, I don't know, Mossad. They say that those guys never delay payment.
Right? I mean, this has become very not lucrative to talk about Ukraine because it was so lucrative before. So lucrative. I mean, clearly we're all sitting here in our mansions, and this is just a decoration of a white wall in a normal Ukrainian apartment. In general, I have a very similar house to Yanukovych, obviously. But yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
Yulia, I have a small message for everybody who wants to start their like social media or some kind of other media platform and they want to become YouTubers, etc. Because currently people watching situations with Stanet, for example, they consider them like best practices. It's a good way to earn money, like connect with Russians, get paid, etc. But at the same time, look at Russia. They're spending tremendous money on war right now. Their people are completely destitute. At the same time, all kinds of Ukrainian channels are being sponsored by like George Soros, CIA, Mossad. We have money. Join the good side.
yeah,
You better go with us.
except you know what the funny thing is? Like, if you look at the people who promote Russian narratives, aka Jackson Hankel and oh my gosh, why am I blanking right now? Kim.com and Elon Musk and the Fox News guy. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe Tucker Carlson. If you look at those people, they're legitimately millionaires and they flaunt their wealth and they drive these like crazy cars and they live in these crazy mansions. They, of course, are doing it out of the goodness of their heart and because of the love for Russia and the reasonable things and because they want to spread the right information. us sitting in probably a 1-bedroom apartment each in like a moderate in a moderate environment, we are doing this for money. Like, I mean, I recently was able to finally afford a vehicle that's 10 years old. Like, I finally have a car, okay? And it's 10 years old. It's not a Ferrari. I'm not driving a Bentley. I don't live in a mansion, but I'm getting paid by George Soros. Tucker Carlson, who literally does all of those things, he is just the beacon of truth for free out of the goodness of his heart. I always find this so funny because I think this actually concludes a very good idea, right? Like, Russian propaganda takes things and frames them the way that it works for them. It's like it takes misinformation and lies that can be proven to be lies, but it says so many times that you're wrong and these are not lies that at some point you start believing them, right? It's like, this is a great example. Like, there are 3 people here who talk about Ukraine because we want to talk about Ukraine. I'm sure that none of us are like making a ton of money and buying whatever it is that we want for ourselves, right? It's like, you have to budget, you have to think of like the things that you can afford, because obviously you get some sort of a paycheck from YouTube. If you get enough views, you get some sort of a paycheck from TikTok. Recently, it's all been decreased. So basically, we survive on like the goodwill of the people that have been watching us for 2.5 years. But it's not like exorbitant amount of wealth, right? And Russia's like, they're getting paid, they're rich. And people are looking at this, right? And they're like, oh, it can be, but they're getting paid, they're rich, they're getting paid, they're getting paid, they're getting paid. And people start believing that you get paid to say this. And then you see people that are actually very clearly bathing in money. And they're like, no, but these people are not getting paid. Clearly, they're not getting paid. Clearly, they're not getting paid. And you start believing it and you start defending it yourself. Meanwhile, it is genuinely like, it's surreal that you can take these 2 pictures and take most Ukrainian supporters who are sitting in normal homes in like a 1-bedroom apartment with a 10-year-old car and say that they get paid exorbitant amounts of money to do this, and then take Russian supporters that all have like sports cars and houses and all of this stuff and are like flaunting their wealth online and taking pictures with dollar stacks, right? And you're like, yes, these are honest to God people who are making their money with no schemes whatsoever. And it's surreal, right? But that's how propaganda works. It takes something and it makes you think of it the way that they want to frame it.
Yeah. Well, they're very, very good at it, unfortunately. And
you can do
I
anything
think,
to yeah, I was gonna say, you can do
yes,
anything to combat it. Like, each one of us could take, like, let's say if we had debt, right? Like, each one of us could take our like um, whatever it is that we have debt on, right, and show it to the public, and then we could take Tucker Carlson's spending and put it all in one PDF with like bank seals and show the difference, and people would still say that it's not real because you're so conditioned.
yeah, but on the
Want to do.
other hand, Yulia, there is still good news, because generally a lot of commentaries coming from Russian supporters, like on X platform, the Twitter, about like pro-Ukrainians being paid, etc., etc. They come from people who don't exist. Because again, considering to the data that was declassified by the FBI during 2 different trials, Russians created tens of millions of fake accounts, and basically a lot of opinions that we hear that either support Russia or talk about like Ukraine, those opinions come from people who don't exist. They come from like a dude sitting in Moscow with this big like gateway with thousands of SIM cards installed, and he just creates a AI model that later shares its content, creates its content, like generates its content on its own without even like human interference. Therefore, like, imagine how cleaner and how more fun, I would say, less toxic the internet environment would become if one day all those bot farms would just stop existing. You would be impressed. You go online on Twitter and nobody posts, like disinformation about like Ukraine, about other countries. Like, how crazy is that?
But also to those of you on the far left who talk about the environment and global warming and don't support Ukraine because of whatever it is, and you like Russia because you like the Soviet nostalgia, here is a reason for you to dislike Russia. The planet Earth is going to, I don't know, explode and stop existing, and we're going to have much hotter, unsurvivable temperatures faster, largely because of the amount of electricity that Russia uses in order to supply their bot farms. When you talk about crypto and how much crypto consumes, right? It probably consumes more than crypto because there are so many of them. But I think with I guess like a good, what would be a good conclusive part to our conversation today? What can we expect now that events in the world are heating up? There is a Georgian election, there is an American election. Of course, there are lots of decisions that are about to be made or are being propped to be made about helping Ukraine and letting Ukraine strike Ukraine's NATO membership. What should we expect in the info space? Speaking from YouTube, TikTok, X in the next couple of weeks as these events unfold.
Personally, I think that Russians will direct their efforts at other countries because they have like Canada, they have UK, they have Europe, they have Australia, and they will direct their efforts at brainwashing people there, spreading their disinformation, their pro-Russian narratives in those countries, because currently what we see, European Union countries of the European Union want to concentrate on buying weaponry produced in European Union. So they want their own production. They want to buy weapons only in Europe because facing potential return of Trump, it may cause a lot of trouble for Europeans, especially if the dude quits NATO as he promised. And we can see European countries consolidating much more than previously and increasing their counter-propaganda activities and stuff like that. So I think that Russians will try to destroy unity within Europe. So after the elections in the United States, no matter the result, they will concentrate their main informational attack on the European countries. That is something that we should expect.
And I also think that European countries, most of them have increased their military budgets, and these things are not increased for 6 months or 1 year. The budgeting plans go on for 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years. They make plans of how to purchase what ammunition, what amount of tanks or helicopters in the next 10 years, sometimes 20. And these orders go to South Korea, United States, Germany, for example. Europe is weaponizing at the fastest pace since the Cold War, and this has been started and initiated by the greatest NATO salesman, Putin. So the step that he wanted to avoid is now going on in Europe. Everybody is weaponizing, especially Poland, Finland, Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is in war, but the scale at what they are innovating and building, for example, their ballistic missile systems now, this is something we in the West could not foresee, Putin could not foresee, and I think in 5 years, Putin will face a massively weaponized front of Baltics, Finland, Poland, and Ukraine. I think this is going to happen.
I agree with that. I think that with the efforts to influence these elections and with the efforts to destroy the West, which is at the helm with America, because they always obviously they target America and then hope that the rest are going to follow, they're actually only going to mobilize more of European countries and smaller European countries. And if they all come together and get on a military budgeting and military expense route, I think it's not gonna work for them. In the short term, it might, but in the long term, I don't think it will. Well, thank you so much, guys, to spending an hour of your time and talking about this. And it was really nice to meet you, Arthur. And thank you for always being here, Starsky. I feel like we should probably have a show together where I'm here and you're here, and then someone is in the middle, and we're talking to them, because it kind of sometimes feels like that in a good way. And I really hope to see both of you here again. Well, I know I will see Starsky here again, but I hope to see you here again, Arthur.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
So, as always, I hope that this conversation has inspired you to think about things that you might be thinking of every day or seeing every day on the internet from a different angle and in a different light. That's what we aim to do every single time. We aim to give you a lot more context and food of thought. Not change your opinion or anything, but give you more information to form your opinion. And if you like these kinds of conversations and want to see more of them, please don't forget to follow UATV English and The Gays, and of course send it to a friend, because you never know who might be interested or may be inspired by these conversations next. And of course, please comment your questions, suggestions, and what you thought about this conversation, and maybe, I don't know, something that we've missed or something that you might want to see next, because I read all of them and I'm very interested in your opinion. Even if you think I don't see them, I see them. I might not always respond, but I always read them. Anyways, see you next time.